Hi, all. Okay, so we're on round two here about what's so great about it. I just kind of got a reply email from this. I don't know if I told you I had this Marine Corps general that was a friend of mine, and I had tried to explain to him since March that none of this was actually happening by going to the hospitals and filming them and also filming the Central Park tents and the Javits Center. And I tried to explain to him that the media is obviously lying to us, and he has been fighting me about it this whole time. And finally, I got mad enough. I was like, why why don't you believe what I'm showing you? Like, this is like you sent out one of your lieutenants on reconnaissance, and they come back with film and you still don't believe it. And I also told him, I used to run PCR tests in the lab. I know what PCR is for, and it is not for a virus. It is preposterous to use this as a virus. And he says, that I have too much hubris. And then, of course, he went on to attack me personally, saying that, the reason why I don't have a relationship in my life is because of my conspiracy theories. Not to mention the fact that I wasn't a conspiracy theorist when the relationships that broke down in my life when that actually happened, but he doesn't know well enough. So, anyways, instead of being upset, I figured I would go into this video and do something to chip away at these bastards, since they kind of like to chip away at me and against any of us who seem to think for ourselves. We got a whole lot of conspiracy going on here, right? This is totally conspiracy. Klaus Schwab and Thierry Mallory. This I just made all this up. They didn't publish it. They're not part of the World Economic Forum or anything. Anything you see back here that I'm going to read to you that they're actually selling online is all a conspiracy theory. I'm not showing my face today. I've not been well, and you can see it. This head and skull neck injury has been really bad the last couple of days. So, all right. So when we stopped, we were talking about how the world is now online, right? This is how they're going to control us. That passport of Ireland type thing. So we're going through this article right here. Not this article. This is actually a book. So they say we can see velocity everywhere. Whether it's a crisis, social discontent, technological developments in adoption, geopolitical upheaval, the financial markets, and of course the manifestation of infectious diseases, everything now runs on fast forward. And that's what they want. They don't want you to be able to get your footing and actually think. See, as a result, we operate in a real time society with the nagging feeling that the pace of life is ever increasing. And this is interesting. I've been watching videos, and there's been people who actually think that time is actually faster, and I don't know if that is true, but I did notice that they added in Ophiuchus, that new astrology sign a few years ago, which means that they actually added in a month. So are we really going that fast? Who knows? I can't really fight about it, but let's keep talking. Research performed by scientists at Microsoft shows, for example, that being slower by no more than 250 milliseconds, a quarter of a second, is enough for a website to lose hits to its faster competitors. Yeah. So basically, they're basically fishing on us, right? Like they show like something shiny, and then like fish, we hit it and then we get hooked. And that's what they're up to, right? And the fish isn't thinking, is that a bug or is that a worm? No, they're hitting it. It's like reaction, and that's why this is happening. Nothing illustrated this more vividly than the breakneck speed with which COVID progressed in March 2020. Less than a month from the maelstrom provoked by the staggering speed at which the pandemic engulfed most of the world, engulfed most of the televisions of the world, a whole new era seemed to emerge. Right? The outbreak was thought to have taken place in China sometime earlier. And then the exponential global progression of the pandemic took many decision makers and a majority of the public by surprise. Yeah, because it's impossible. What do they? We sent all the Chinese patients over here and across the world so they can infect people? Come on, let's think. Consider the following in terms of days for doubling. If a pandemic grows at 30% a day, as COVID 19 did around mid March for some of the worst affected countries, registered cases or deaths will double in little more than 2 days. How is that possible? If someone is sick and in their bed and they die, like Ebola, right? If it's something so bad like Ebola virus, they die and it doesn't spread because they die so quickly. See, this is another thing that's so fishy, right? Expressed differently at the global level, it took COVID 19 3 months to reach 100,000 cases, 12 days to double, 4 days to reach 300,000, and 400,000 and 500,000 cases. These numbers make our head spin. Of course they do. That's designed. Extreme velocity in action. Exponential growth is so baffling to our cognitive functions that we often deal with it by developing exponential myopia, thinking of it as nothing more than very fast. More brainwashing. Voters expect almost immediate policy results and movement. Governments, by necessity, take a while to make decisions and implement them. Yeah, because the government should be asking, is it constitutional? Right? That is the issue. And we never talk about that, whether they have the right to do what they do. They just do it because it's problem, reaction, solution. It's Hegelian dialectic, right? Two seemingly opposing sides with the same end in mind, right? If the government had truly thought about what it was going to do and this was real, it wouldn't have happened so fast. They wouldn't have passed the law that actually funded the pay for people who weren't going to have work. In January. They passed that bill, right? They knew what they were doing. Velocity has led many observers to establish false equivalence by comparing seasonal flu with COVID. Yeah, because seasonal flu is worse. We're seeing it now. According to the CDC, between 39 and 56 million Americans contracted the flu during the 2019 and 2020 winter season, with between 24,000 and 62,000 deaths. Yeah, but what did those people die of? Just because someone has the flu, if you go to the hospital and you have a heart attack and you end up dying from pneumonia, it's the pneumonia. You wouldn't have been in that situation if you hadn't been sick in the first place. It's ridiculous. Spreads like a tsunami in a hot spot pattern. Where? I lived in Manhattan and I still don't know anyone who died of the flu. Complex systems are often characterized by an absence of visible causal link between their elements, which makes them virtually impossible to predict. So, but they're predicting everything to go wrong here. Yeah, a wide range of outcomes. So here he goes comparing things to the economy again. In 2008, how many experts anticipated that mortgage backed securities originating in the United States would cripple banks around the world and ultimately bring the global financial system to the verge of collapse? Well, anyone with a brain knew this, right? Anybody who was paying attention knows what they're doing. And these people who run this world know exactly what they're up to. Will we adjust to the norms of confinement? Will the majority of us or not abide by the rules? The COVID-19 is a white swan event, explicitly presented as such by Nassim Taleb in The Black Swan, published in 2007. Something that would eventually take place with a great deal of certainty. And here we go. Bill Gates have been warning us about the World Health Organization, who all they do is lie, the World Economic Forum, these people. So this guy is writing his own advertisement, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and individuals. Bill Gates, who has a degree in nothing, right? Yet he is telling us he can't even protect his own computers from viruses. They know, right? Oh, it's specifying it would emerge in a highly populated place where economic development forces people and wildlife together. It would spread quickly and silently by multiple exploiting networks of human travel and trade, and would reach multiple countries by thwarting containment. And here we go again, unprepared, and we're ravaged, right? Oh, Asian countries shut down, and that's how they contained SARS. You know, Asians have been wearing masks on their faces since at least before 1999 when I lived there. So if masks work, how did they ever get SARS? How did they ever get COVID, right? Complexity creates limits to our knowledge and understanding of things, and that's how they want it. If you really think about it, it's very simple. You have a world government that wants complete and total control over you. And it's very easy to see. I mean, they put out their own documents all of the time, but they want it to be complicated. They want to present so much information to you that you can't see the forest for the trees. President Arman Sarkisian of Armenia made this point when he coined the expression quantum politics, outlining how the classical world of post Newtonian physics, linear, predictable, and to somewhat extent even deterministic, had given way to the quantum world, highly interconnected, uncertain, incredibly complex, and also changing depending upon the position of the observer. This expression recalls quantum physics, which explains how everything works and is the best description of the nature of particles that can make up matter and the forces with which they interact. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare this quantum world. Yeah, the imaginary world that they want you to believe in, right? All things in science, theories, right? You have a hypothesis that you try to disprove. You can't disprove the hypothesis, it becomes a theory, but the theory is still subject to being disproved, always. Let's see what they plan to do with the economics. Today's economy is unrecognizable. Yes, because of globalism, right? They want you to depend on people over in Peru when you're in the Netherlands because you need your freaking avocados or whatever. They don't want you to be able to depend upon your local farmer. All right, so here's what they pulled over the space of 18 months in 1665 about the last bubonic plague. All trades being stopped, employment ceased, the labor, and by that the bread of the poor were cut off. And at first, indeed, the cries of the poor were most lamentable to hear. Thousands of them, having stayed in London till nothing but desperation sent them away, death overtook them on the road, and they served for no better than the messengers of death. They're starving people to death. Whenever they declare some sort of epidemic, and this is my little hypothesis. Whenever they declare some little epidemic, it's the government taking away people's right to live and work and to be employed. And then they call the deaths a pandemic, or like they did in the Irish famine, right? The potato famine. It was a genocide, but they blame it on the potato when it was really the British government seizing all of the animals, butter, milk that Ireland had produced that year, and also blockading the ports so that the American ships were not allowed to go in. In the midst of calamity, economics was always at a loggerheads with the interest of public health. Yeah, even though until there was an understanding of germ-borne diseases, the plague was mostly attributed to foul air and noxious vapors said to arise from stagnant or polluted marshes. There was nonetheless a sense that very commercial arteries that had generated prosperity were now transformed into vectors of poison. But when quarantines were proposed or imposed, those who stood to lose the most, merchants and in some places artisans and workers, from the stoppage of markets, fair, and trade, put up stiff resistance. Must the economy die so that it could be resurrected in robust good health? Yes, said the guardians of public health who became part of urban life in Europe from the 15th century onwards. This has been their scheme the whole time, hasn't it? Taking over. And honestly, this whole foul air and noxious vapors, I mean, well, were they poisoning people? Was the government putting out some sort of chemical into the marshes or chemicals, even just feces into the water to make people sick? That's how you get polio, is feces in the water. History shows that epidemics have been the great resetters of countries, economics, and social fabric. Why should it be different with COVID 19? Significant macroeconomic aftereffects can persist as long as 40 years, substantially depressing real rates of return. Now, this is for a pandemic. This is in contrast to wars that have the opposite effect. They destroy capital while pandemics do not. Wars trigger higher real interest rates, implying greater economic activity, while pandemics trigger lower real rates, implying sluggish economic activity. That's why I've been calling this the economic demolition this whole time. On the labor side, there will be gains at the expense of capital since real wages tend to rise after pandemics. Yeah, because they kill a lot of people. So here we've got two ways that the world government has controlled us. They create a war or they create a pandemic. Interesting. Unlike previous pandemics, it is far from certain that COVID-19 crisis will tip the balance in favor of labor and against capital. For political and social reasons, it could, but technology changed the mix. Yeah, this time because they're trying to replace us with robots. In fact, if you've got a young kid, try to try to get him to go into robotics because that will probably be one of the few jobs of the future is fixing the robots when something's wrong with them. This is very likely to be an epidemic that coexists with humans for a long time, becomes seasonal, and is sustained within human bodies. Wouldn't they love that? We still really don't know how dangerous COVID 19 is. Yeah, because it's not even real. Oh my God. The number of COVID 19 cases, measured or not, that result in death remains a matter of debate, around 0.4% to 0.5% and possibly up to 1%. Unbelievable. Right public health strategy and concomitant economic strategy. Why do you need, for something that isn't even killing 1% of people who get it, we need to just throw away all our rights and reconfigure society? Oh, that sounds really coincidental. This is a novel virus, new to humanity, and nobody knows what will happen. What does novel mean? Novel. A fictitious prose narrative of book length, typically representing character and action with some degree of realism, i.e., it's not real. A new. Yeah, yeah, it's different from anything you've seen before. It is first and foremost a respiratory disease, but for a small and sizable number of patients, symptoms range from cardiac inflammation and digestive problems to kidney infection, blood clots, and meningitis. Yeah, all the people that they say died that had, two and a half other 2.6 average comorbidities, like they did in the recent August 26th CDC release, saying that 9,200 people died in America and of CV alone. Everyone else had an average of 2.6 comorbidities, right? And those comorbidities were listed as diabetes, heart disease, cancer, the big things that actually kill folks. And, think about it, dying with something. Right now, I could go outside and get hit by a bus, and if you tested my body, you'd find E. coli, you'd find staph, right? You'd find whatever remnant virus from some cold I might have had 2 years ago. That doesn't mean it killed you, right? Dying with something doesn't mean you died of it, right? And because they didn't do any autopsies and there are no viral load reports, how do we know what anyone died of? You don't. Three plausible scenarios, all based on the core assumption that the pandemic could go on affecting us until 2022. In the first scenario, the initial wave that began in March 2020 is followed by a series of two smaller waves that occur through mid 2020 and then over a 2 year period, gradually diminishing in 2021 like peaks and valleys. Unbelievable. In the second scenario, the first wave is followed by a larger wave that takes place in the third and fourth quarter of 2020, and one or more or several smaller subsequent waves, like during the 1918-1990 Spanish flu pandemic that none of my relatives ever talked about. because it was so bad. In the third scenario, not seen with past influenza pandemics, but possible for COVID 19, a slow burn of ongoing transmission and case occurrence following the first wave of 2020, but without a clear wave pattern, just with smaller ups and downs. So they've got it all covered no matter what. They have the scenario for you, don't they? Just like Operation Lockstep, Rockefeller Foundation. Policymakers must be prepared to deal with at least another 18 to 24 months of significant COVID 19 activity, with hotspots popping up periodically in diverse geographic areas. How do they know this? How, if this is some brand new virus we've never heard about, right? And we don't know anything about it and we're so scared, how do you know? Ridiculous. The economic fallacy of sacrificing a few lives to save growth. Why is it a fallacy? More people reliably die from starvation and lack of heat than will ever die of this pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, there has been a perennial debate about saving lives versus saving the economy. Lives versus livelihoods. This is a false trade off. Why? From an economic standpoint, the myth of having to choose between public health and hit a GDP growth can be easily debunked, leaving aside the not insignificant ethical issue of whether sacrificing some lives to save the economy is a social Darwinian proposition or not. Deciding to not save lives will not improve economic welfare. How can you say that? How can you say that? On the supply side, if prematurely loosening the various restrictions and the rules of social distancing result in acceleration of infection, which almost all scientists believe it would, more employees and workers would become infected and more businesses would just stop functioning. No, but you've made the decision that everyone's business will just stop functioning, right? Except unless they're a part of the tyranny, right? So you can't risk letting people's immune systems protect them. You want to make sure that everyone's shut down. After the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the validity of this argument was proven on several occasions. Okay. They ranged from factories that had to stop operating because too many workers had fallen ill, primarily the case for work environments that forced physical proximity between workers, like in meat processing facilities, to naval ships stranded because too many crew members had been infected, thus preventing the vessel from operating normally. An additional factor that negatively affects the supply of labor that around the world, there were repeated instances of workers refusing to return to work for fear. This is the whole thing, for fear of becoming infected. Every year we have the flu. People get sick. Most people get a cold once per year. And only this year has it become to the fact that you think you're going to die from the flu because the news tells you so. Employees who felt vulnerable to the disease generate a wave of activism, including work stoppages. That's what they want, right? They want you to volunteer to destroy yourself, right? It helps with their karma. On the demand side, the argument boils down to the most basic and yet fundamental determinant of economic activity, sentiments. Because consumer sentiments are what really drives economies. A return to any kind of normal will only happen when and not before confidence returns. And they don't want confidence to return. I mean, I just saw an article the other day about COVID wraps up through toilets. They are desperate to keep the narrative going. And you thought snakes in a toilet, right? Oh, discovery made in China after researchers swabbed a long vacant apartment directly below the family of five who tested positive for COVID 19. Despite the fact that no one was living in the apartment below, the researchers found traces of the virus on the sink faucet and shower handle. I mean, does anybody really believe this? And so what? If it didn't actually kill everyone, if it were really that bad, everyone would have died there in the first place. This is just